The soldier's mouth was dry, his hands trembling, his uniform soaked through with sweat, blood, and the weight of too many days in the jungle. Somewhere beyond the tangled underbrush and misted ridgelines, someone screamed. A short, sharp burst of agony, and then silence. The silence was worse. Private Owen glanced down the trench at Garrison Hill, where the earth had been churned into mud by mortars and rain. He could see a boot jutting from a collapsed position. No one had moved to pull it free. The man attached to it was gone, or soon would be. There were too many to bury now, too little time. The Japanese were coming again. It was April 1944. The Battle of Kohima had begun. Two armies met here, one entrenched in defense of the British Empire, the other bent on its destruction. What followed would become one of the most brutal, rain-soaked, fever-ridden slogs in the annals of war. A place where death came not just from bullets or bayonets, but from heat stroke, starvation, and the jungle itself. Before it ended, the men who fought at Kohima and Imphal would endure something close to hell. It started with ambition. The Japanese, flush with victories in Southeast Asia, had a plan to strike at India. Operation U-Go. Led by Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi, the goal was simple on paper: push through Burma, cross into India via the narrow mountain passes, and capture the supply hub of Imphal. If Imphal fell, Kohima would be next. If Kohima fell, the road to Dimapur and the railways beyond would be open. And with them, perhaps, the fate of British India. The British, under General William Slim, weren't blind to the threat, but they were ill-prepared for what came next. The Japanese moved fast, too fast. By March, they had surrounded Imphal. Soon after, they turned toward Kohima, where a small British and Indian force was all that stood between them and the northeastern plains. Kohima was not a city. It was a ridge, a high spine of land sliced by steep slopes and thick forest. On that ridge sat a few government buildings, a supply depot, and a narrow tennis court that would soon become one of the most fiercely contested plots of earth in history. On April 6th, the Japanese 31st Division launched its assault. They hit hard, mortars screamed through the night, machine guns chattered like devils in the trees. Japanese infantry poured forward, silent, swift, unrelenting. The defenders, British infantry, Indian troops, Gurkhas, held their ground with fists, blades, and bare willpower. They had no choice. There was nowhere to fall back to. The fighting grew so intense, so close, that it was often hand-to-hand. Bayonet charges at dawn, grenades lobbed across the tennis court like shuttlecocks. Soldiers sheltering in foxholes heard whispers in Japanese just feet away. There were no reinforcements, no rest, just the mud, the blood, and the smell of decay. Rain turned the battlefield into a swamp. Trenches collapsed. Leeches swarmed wounds. Dysentery took hold. Still, the line held. Weeks passed. The defenders grew thin, gaunt. Ammunition dwindled. Rations spoiled. Water came from rusted canteens filled in bomb craters. And still, they held. Then came the counterattack. British and Indian reinforcements began pushing up from Dimapur, clawing through the jungle to reach the ridge. They came in waves, through fire, through night, through fields of the dead. At Imphal, the Japanese had dug in, surrounding the garrison. But General Slim gambled on a bold plan. Instead of breaking out, the British would hold tight and destroy the enemy by starving them. The Japanese supply lines were stretched. Their troops, already malnourished, began to wither. By May, their advance had stalled. By June, it began to unravel. At Kohima, the tide turned. The Japanese were pushed back, ridge by ridge, trench by trench. The tennis court changed hands more than 20 times. It became sacred ground. soaked with the lives of men who never meant to be heroes, but became them anyway. The final push came in July. Starving, diseased, and exhausted, the Japanese began to retreat. Their dream of invading India lay broken in the mud. In the end, the Battle of Kohima and Imphal was not just a military victory, it was a turning point. For the British, it marked the beginning of the end of Japanese expansion in Southeast Asia. For the Japanese, it was the costliest defeat to that point. Over 50,000 men lost, many to starvation and disease. For the men who survived, it was something else entirely. They came from Liverpool and Leicester, Rangoon and Delhi, from small towns and vast cities, their lives reduced to khaki and steel. The Gurkhas brought curved blades passed down from grandfathers. British officers carried maps and ink pens. They were all strangers to the jungle, until it became the one thing they all had in common. And once you had fought in the jungle never quite left you. There were men who dug into the hillside during the siege at Kohima, whose fingers grew raw from carving trenches in clay with their mess tins. They slept beside the bodies of fallen comrades, too dangerous to retrieve under constant shell fire. They rationed their bullets and their breath. Some wrote letters they would never send. Others wrote nothing at all, only stared blankly at the sky and waited for the next barrage. A chaplain at Imphal wrote in his journal about a night spent among the wounded. He described a boy from Calcutta, dying with his hand clutched around a letter from his sister. He whispered her name over and over as the fever took him. The chaplain stayed until the boy fell silent, then walked outside and wept into the earth. On the far ridges, artillery crews fired until their palms blistered. When the Japanese guns found them, the shells tore through trees like paper. One soldier remembered crouching behind a root, feeling the ground shake with every impact. He said the jungle felt alive, not just with birds and insects, but with breath and warning, as if it too wanted the war to end. By July, the rains came heavy, turning battlefields into rivers. Graves flooded, trenches collapsed. Yet the men fought on, soaked to the bone, fevered, coughing blood, eyes sunken. They no longer looked like soldiers, more like ghosts holding rifles. And yet, they held the line. Day after day, they held. Somewhere, under the shade of the old cherry trees near Garrison Hill, lies the forgotten button of a soldier's tunic. No name, no rank, just metal, dulled with time. A quiet relic of a boy who never made it home. Children play nearby now. The past sleeps beneath their feet. But every so often, the wind stirs the earth, and history breathes again. At the Imphal War Cemetery, rows of gravestones sit in symmetrical silence, framed by manicured hedges. Each stone bears a name, a unit, an age, some as young as 17. Visitors walk through slowly, voices hushed. The air is heavy, not with sorrow, but with the weight of what was endured. In the far back corner, there's one grave that rarely sees flowers. The name is worn, the epitaph faded, but beneath it lies a man who held a hill with bleeding hands, who refused to fall until the line held. He did not die for glory, he died so the man beside him might live. And in that, there was meaning. The Battle of Kohima and Imphal is gone from most textbooks, overshadowed by louder campaigns, bigger names. But those who know, they remember. They carry the weight in their bones, in their dreams, in the way they fall silent when the monsoon starts. Because rain was not just rain back then, it was warning, it was memory. And so we tell the story, not for victory, not for vengeance, but for truth. For the boy in the trench who never saw another sunrise, for the medic who stayed behind, for the family that waited by a door that never opened. This is their story, and now it's yours too. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.